Welcome to Campus Uncovered. At first glance, the University of Amsterdam may seem like a space of thought and freedom, but under the surface, tension simmers. In October 2023, students filled the Rotters Island campus to protest the university's alleged ties to Israeli institutions. But this was only the beginning, because in May 2024, encampments rose, the police intervened, and the campus became a site of resistance. The silence from the university was deafening, especially when considering their response to the national budget cuts. In October 2024, the university publicly opposed the Dutch government's decision to cut 1 billion euros from the education budget. On November 25th, 20,000 people marched in The Hague with the university's backing and encouragement. So why is it that one protest is met with solidarity, while the other is met with riot police? What happens when the dust settles? Who gets to speak, and who gets silenced? Our first interviewee stood on the front lines of the May 2024 protests. Through arrests, campus closures, and confrontations,
I participated in a few protests. I've been present at the encampments also last year, so I watched the whole thing go down. But I will say that my participation in the protests have decreased. As much as I would love to participate a lot more, I do find myself gravitating towards other kinds of activism, like poetry nights, film festivals. I'll go watch a movie in solidarity.
her story begins not with conflict, but with community. From encampments to national walkouts, she saw students stand together, even as the ground beneath them was forcibly cleared.
I think the university itself did not make me feel the best, but I think the teachers and the people around me and the students and my classmates, I felt so much solidarity from them. I remember my teachers counseling class being like, today we're striking, you guys. And for me, that was, that's more than I could ever ask for. That means more to me because it's on a human level. They care, they're counseling class to put in effort to show up. For me, that kind of compensates for the lack of security and safety that I feel from the university as an institution.
Our second interviewee witnessed both waves of protest, the ones for Palestine and the ones against budget cuts.
I was at all the protests last year, the ones that were outside of UvA also, so I've been experiencing quite a lot of different things. It all kind of started with the small encampment that we had. And in the beginning it was quite fun, it was quite peaceful. All of us were helping people around, trying to make it secure. And the budget cut protests that I attended, two of them, one of them was the big one in Den Haag, and then one of them was a smaller one here. They were, I think, also organized by the university themselves, and they were quite peaceful also. And it was quite the same like the Palestine protests. The only difference is that in the Palestine protests, the police were called within 5 minutes, or they were already there. Most of the times the protests hadn't even started and the police was there.
Not all activism looks like marching. One student we spoke to works with the Activist Party at the UVA, which won the largest share of seats in the Central Student Council elections in May 2025.
Hi, we're the Activist Party. We're the only party who's active all year round. We advocate for affordable food, affordable education. We want the university to not be a diploma factory. We're the reason actually we have an affordable food stand.
Our third interviewee is also a student at the UVA. He chose to remain anonymous for his personal security as an international student. He speaks on the importance of student voices during times of crisis and injustice.
I think the UFA has a very, very strong community for student activism. And I think it's really beautiful to see because you'll never see anybody heading these things alone. So it really shows that whatever you need will be met by some sort of community within the UFA.
With a 21.5% voter turnout, the highest it's been since 2013, they saw a huge wave of support. But even inside the system, they face institutional backlash. This begs the question, what kind of student voices are actually being heard?
I don't think there's a strong sense of democracy throughout the university, which sucks, especially because they're pushing this whole thing with the parties and showing oh yeah, you guys do have a say. It just seems counterintuitive that you're electing a party that then has to fight and fight and fight for months and years to then make a change.
We've been there for every protest. We are constantly advocating in all of the meetings with the dean so that international students are not disproportionately affected. This is a result of the extreme right-wing Dutch government, which we are constantly challenging.
I just wish it was generally more democratic, so we weren't all blindly paying tuition for an institution that we can't stand with and can't appreciate.
From May to June 2024, encampments were cleared by police, buildings were locked down, and arrests were made. On May 8th, the police intervened at Oud-Manisport, and on June 21st, the university reported vandalism and shut down access to the campus entirely. While protesters against the budget cuts were framed as protectors of education, those standing with Palestinian liberation were labeled as disruptive and even dangerous. But this contrast isn't just about optics, it's about legitimacy. Where one protest fit within the university's moral comfort zone, the other tested it. One challenged policy, one challenged complicity. Now we shift our focus to the bystanders, UVA students who chose not to participate in the protests. But what was the reason for this? We asked them directly. Some based on concerns regarding the institution's response, others due to feeling disconnected or unsure.
For me personally, I don't believe that I'm educated enough. I'm more neutral.
Yeah, pretty similar. I don't think I know enough about the issue to go out there and actually campaign. And maybe I was a bit scared too, because there's always a risk of it getting violent, and it's just not my cup of tea.
A lot of people talk about how you need to be educated to start a revolution or like have to be informed about things, but most people will have all the information they need and not take that step forward. So if you have the time and the power to take that step forward and you're not, I think it's really just like showing your character and where your priorities lie. And I think it's a very like individualistic mindset that can really bring down like a community in times of need like now.
Next we spoke with Professor Jan Toerlings, a familiar face in the activism scene at the UVA. He marched against the budget cuts, stood with Palestine, and protested the recent police violence.
I am assistant professor here in Amsterdam University in the Department of Media Studies, and I have been working here for 20 years. Basically, when they built the barricade here just behind in the building, it was already locked off when I came here, and there was no way of getting through. They had cut off this lane, this road. They had cut off the road there on the bridge. No, so I have participated in some of them the protests against the police violence. Then afterwards, there was a big one on Luther's Island that I was, but never on the ones that really then were policed very, very, very hard. There was always cut out. I used it actually to one of the policemen. It's like, these are my students, I need to go and see them. And the policeman didn't allow that. There's a lot of colleagues who think that students have the right to protest, but the one issue that always is mentioned and comes back in all kind of discussions is the destruction of property. Like there's a Dutch ideology is that you should not destroy things. It's even worse than killing people. We have what is called in the Netherlands a medezeggenschapsorgaan. It's the representation of the students within the university. It's like the FSR. You have voted or you could vote for your representatives. And so the argument from the people that are, let's say, more in favor of order, their argument is that you should follow the proper representational paths. And that's precisely what people have tried. But if the proper representational paths are not followed up or are ignored, that's when you have these kind of demonstrations. It's not that the CVP doesn't engage with the students, but they don't engage with them genuinely, in the sense like they listen to them, say, yeah, we hear your concerns, but then afterwards they don't do a lot. On the other hand, to defend the CVP also a little bit, I know that they have a lot of political pressure from outside of the university. So I understand that they are in a way in a difficult position because a number of prominent former UvA alumni, so who had studied here, came with big dramatic gestures, came to put their diploma into the dustbin because they were ashamed in the UvA because they were so pro-Palestine and anti-Semitic. So you see, they are being squeezed from all sides.
We interviewed another lecturer, Jamil. He speaks on the role of the university faculty, what action they can take, and what may be holding them back.
I work at the Media Studies Department. I'm a lecturer here, and I've also been quite an active member of UvA Staff for Palestine over the past few years, and also involved in budget cuts, strikes, and also previous organizations around casual UvA. I think there's many different ways in which people were participating. I think the small picture that one might get by only looking at the encampments of like May 6th, 7th, 8th are just a fragment of kind of the larger mobilization efforts that were required and that were carried out by staff and students over the year. There were a number of different protests, demonstrations, walkouts, speeches, teach-ins as well. That was something that I was very heavily involved in from kind of like day one in the middle of October. I was also in meetings with the executive board from very early on in the process, having these kind of dialogues with them where they just wanted to hear about my feelings but fundamentally not change anything about how their systems work, about what kind of language they use to speak about the genocide. But it really is a testament to just how much coordination is required from all different sides, from kind of the legal standpoint to the direct action protests. All of that is necessary, and I think a whole range of staff participated in all those different areas. Challenges there was that there was a real hesitance, or I would even say a willful denial of any sort of connection being drawn between the budget cuts and the call to cut ties with Israeli institutions and universities. Historically, in periods where fascism is on the rise, militarist thinking is on the rise, the first people to be targeted are the kind of intellectuals, are the academics, are the scholars, are the thinkers. And so budget cuts are not just one way in which we suppress the so-called radical voices of society.
And I think that staff in general are never the prime movers. I mean, the people who started it were the students, and then the staff mobilized around the students, etc.
I think the students were really, in some ways, the driving force. They were really the radical edge that I think also reminded a lot of staff members who were maybe kind of tentative about certain approaches or had certain conceptions of what methods work when organizing in an institution. Some staff members thought that you kind of have to speak the language of the institution, operate according to its frameworks that it kind of allocates for you, whereas the students kind of said, no, we reject the framework of the institution from the start. There's no way that we can kind of work in the channels that it provides us and the kind of ways in which we can express complaints through formal systems. This isn't working. So actually the students really showed that you have to challenge the whole framework in and of itself. And they did a lot of really important radical actions. They supported through a number of different kind of like educational programs as well across the year. They did a lot of social media outreach across the country. I think without them we wouldn't have seen the kinds of transformations that we have.
We had the chance to speak with Esteban Ramos, a barber working at a salon right next to the Oud-Manisport campus. He was working in the shop during the encampments and saw them firsthand.
Mucha gente que lo tomó en forma de entretenimiento, como otras personas que lo tomaron de algo grave, porque sí fue grave, es grave, como los policías le pegan a unos estudiantes porque están protestando, los estudiantes no estaban agrediendo a los policías, no le estaban tirando piedras. Entonces es maluco que la misma policía agreda así, ya, pero obviamente es entendible por parte y parte porque pues, la policía también está haciendo su trabajo.
The day after, there was still a protest at Oud-Manisport, where the campaign had been. And it was still quite peaceful, but at some point a lot of police showed up and they divided us from the main encampment so we couldn't see what they were doing. But they were also beating up everybody that was close by to them. It somehow ended up being that I was in the front on that protest, like at one of the sides. And they used quite a lot of force on us. They used batons, they used their shields. I know that one person even got pepper sprayed. Nobody got arrested that day, thankfully, from the outside, but from the encampment, a couple of people did get arrested. Like, the campus just changed its attitude towards everybody. It changed the way it allowed people to protest. It just became an unsafe place. You never know when a minor inconvenience is going to mean the police are gonna show up.
I think the particular form of like suppression that happens here in the UvA, but also generally in the Netherlands, is very unique. There's kind of this sense in the Netherlands that we're open to dialogue, open to multiple different perspectives, we're willing to engage discursively with these issues, but materially nothing needs to be done. So we'll open the space for you to have your perspective on the matter, for you to organize a teach-in, for you to make a speech, and there won't be any kind of direct consequences for it, but we will kind of surveil, police, monitor, so that you always feel the watchful eye.
I know why the university is doing it. It's because they want to avoid occupations. They've decided at all costs not to have an occupation again, and that's why they call in the authorities. I am still every time I'm shocked by the fact that a CVB, a College van Bestuur, which is supposed to, govern the universities and to take care of the students who are in there, that they call on the police, knowing perfectly well that they will use violence in order to evict them. And it has happened many times since then, and I find it hard to believe that you do that as a university board.
I remember at the very first teach-in that we organized, a police officer came into the single library and walked into the room where we were organizing a teaching event and asked, what is going on here? I've received a complaint. We're talking also about oppressive legal systems and unlawful and unjust proceedings, for instance, of students who have charges of attempted murder placed on them based on police testimony. Not based on any material evidence, not based on any audiovisual evidence. These are the systems then that, for instance, force students to be battling legal cases for months on end. In some cases, I had students who were put into solitary confinement with no just reason.
And they started to barricade the area where the encampment was taking place. And I saw the police vans kind of start to circle around this area.
I think there was a point in time where me and my friends were running away from the police. They'd show up at random times. They'd show up in their big trucks with their batons and be beating on students. It's hard to be a bystander to these kinds of things, and as much as I'd love to step in, I just was warned by my family back home to just, maybe take a step back from that. It might not be the best decision for me.
Unfortunately, for most international students, it just isn't feasible on the day-to-day.
I guess me personally, I'd feel more safe if the police is around, because I don't see why the police would want to harm me if I'm just a bystander.
I kind of disagree with you here, because I feel like if police are there, there's a higher chance of one or the other side provoking each other.
It's been a year at this point. Every time I see a police officer, I'm scared. Every time I see a car pass by campus, I'm scared.
Policing is the instrument that is used by the executive board to suppress, to frighten these critical voices. And that's been happening since day one.
We reached out to both the university and the police for a comment. Unfortunately, we received no response. The silence is not neutral. It's a decision, and it reveals which kind of protests are deemed acceptable and which are not.
When the war in Ukraine started, the protests in support of Ukraine were so peaceful, like the ones we had, but they were met with positivity. So were the protests for the budget cuts. They were supported by the university, but the moment we do a protest trying to stop funding for genocide, all of a sudden we're terrorists.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine began just a year prior to the onslaught in Gaza. There it was very clear that they were able to take a political stance, to name an oppressor, to name an oppressed, to condemn military violence, occupation, and suddenly these terms were lost, suddenly these ideas vanished, posters were taken down. So we again see another major contradiction that, in my perspective, really comes down to a matter of racism, the same kind of racism that allows Palestinians to be dehumanized like this in the first place. The UvA, in some sense, perpetuates this idea. They show concern, but are unwilling to act.
For example, when I did also the 4-day strike in support of Palestine, which was not stimulated by the CVB, but I also didn't have any negative consequences. So in that sense, the CVB facilitates the one type of demonstration more, but the other one, she doesn't make it impossible for the people that work, the employees. For the students, it's a different thing, because I think that they look more at students as, I'm not going to say lesser human beings, but less important.
Students are not a priority, and it's become obvious, especially with the budget cuts.
When it came to the budget cuts, there was this kind of weird sense that the CVB framed their involvement in the demonstrations as if they're on our side.
It was clear, they facilitated completely to go for the demonstration. There was a big national demonstration in The Hague.
But I guess the university stands to lose through the budget cuts, so it would be in their interest to get people to protest.
But there's a weird tension, because on the one hand they're saying, we're with you. On the other hand, they're already implementing measures that harm their staff based on budget cuts that haven't yet taken place.
I think it's obviously very two-faced and the result of a strong sense of hierarchy within the university.
In the official narrative, protests become chaos. Headlines speak of violence and vandalism. But on student-run feeds, we see something else. Sit-ins, speeches, non-violent forms of resistance. So what shapes the story? The act itself, or who reports on it?
This cause has been my entire life since I was a child, and I'm so lucky to have learned so much this entire process. I've heard other sides, I've seen it all. I've seen the other side of the media, I've seen the other. Social media has exposed me to so many different sides of the story, but the only thing that motivates me is kind of that I have seen the other side and I still believe in the cause. Honestly, it has changed the way I live my entire life, and every single day, just the little things, that's what motivates me to kind of keep, I don't know, maybe stay hopeful. And I don't know, it's mostly a personal thing. I've been a bit desensitized to it. I think we got used to it, you know, the occupation, it's all we've ever known. But to see other people so angry too, it's like, okay, this is for real.
I mainly grew up in Saudi Arabia, so like I've always had a lot of Palestinians around me, and like the issue, I guess, is very close to home.
I think I'm also in a period of great uncertainty and grief with like what's happening. I'm also half Palestinian, so it's tremendously difficult for me to see people who look like me, who look like my family, be murdered by the hundreds, and to feel that the tireless efforts that I've put over the past year have seemingly been like a drop in the ocean. And I mean, it just gets worse and worse, the situation. Starvation, slaughter, bombing of schools as shelters for people who have been displaced multiple times over, who are amputated from previous buildings being collapsed on them. I mean, it's just so unfathomable. And I think the other reason why I've pulled away from organizing here is that my contract is coming to an end. This is my last month of teaching at the UvA as well. So this is another problem that we see, where they're very willing to hire sharp, radical, young scholars who are socially engaged, who add a lot to the UvA community, but are always limited by these short-term four-year contracts.
When I grew up in the 1980s, South African apartheid seemed eternal, and at a certain moment it stops. The same with communism in the East Bloc. It looked like it was always going to be there, and then at a certain moment it stops. So at that level, I'm old enough to also know that things might change, and maybe quicker than you think. I compare it to when I got here in early 2000s. There was no student activism. I mean, there was student societies and so, but there was no activism. So what I think it's really, and that started roughly around 2015, that there is a generation of students which have become politically active, who are willing to put literally their bodies on the line, and I find that really impressive. I also see that now already, I think we're moving to another generation where the newer ones are less politically motivated than, let's say, the ones of 3-4 years ago. I think so. I see history goes in waves, and I see that we're going again more towards a less politicized wave. I have the impression.
I don't necessarily know if we've had any, let's say, forward momentum over the past year and a half. It's very difficult to be able to kind of trace and map where are the gains, where have we made progress as a movement, and where also have we made significant losses. It will be this kind of ongoing moving target that must always have justice and human rights at its core. It's going to require us actually thinking differently about how we imagine time and how we imagine history and about how we imagine possibilities for the future.
We are the people that should start a change. We are the people at this age that can force a change upon the world in one way or another. And even if it's in a small way, such as protesting, I do see a change within the people around me. I do see a change in attitudes, and I do think it's helping, even if it's small. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of other universities actually finally cut the ties. So I do hope the same happens here.
Se necesita más allá de las protestas. ¿A qué me refiero con ese punto? Si van a protestar entre los estudiantes, se necesita más apoyo. Y las protestas que no sean daños, o sea, porque los daños no van a afectar, deberían de reunirse todos aquí. Porque hay una masa. La masa hace la fuerza.
But in my opinion, one person can make a change. Maybe not so much by themselves, by being there, but because they will make an example.
Yeah, I also think similar to what he's saying. Student activism in general, I don't think you see immediate results. Over time, you definitely see change.
That, okay, it might not be on an institutional level yet, it might not be governmental yet, but at least on a social level, on like a scale of my friendships and my community around me, there is some concern. Maybe not everyone understands it completely, and I get that because I'm also really trying to navigate like what this means for us and what this means in the grand scheme of the world. Even though there hasn't been large-scale changes, I think that it starts there, and I think it starts with your community and your friends. And if you don't think protest is for you, that's completely understandable. I think activism manifests itself in so many different ways. There's so many things going on, especially in Amsterdam. I'm grateful we live in such a diverse city that has such a focus on culture and arts, and there's so many other ways to show your support.
That the university does not call the police on their student body.
Don't call the police with the intent to beat up your students. Don't allow them to arrest and humiliate your own students.
And that they're allowed a stronger voice within the university's administration, because the student body is what gives the university its character, gives the university its history.
Be open for discussion. It is your right to advocate for what you morally see as right.
This is about more than just one protest. This is about power, image, and which voices are given the room to rise. Since October 2023, students have stood up against war, against cuts, and against silence. Activism is more than confrontation. It's courage, community, and the refusal to stay silent. At university, we learn to ask questions. But what happens when our questions point us back at the university itself? But how deep-rooted is this student activism? We'll be looking at the history and origin of both activism and protest at the University of Amsterdam. Find out in the next episode of Campus Uncovered.